So I will call the Wednesday, February 12th, 2025 meeting of the Essex Junction City Council to order. Are there any agenda additions or changes?
No.
No, none at all. Okay. Public to be heard. This is a portion of the evening where members of the public can bring comments, questions, concerns to the board. We'll either try to answer them tonight or get back with an answer later. Is there anyone in the room that has anything they'd like to share? No? Great. Anybody on, not great that you don't want to share, just, sorry. Is there anyone online? Risa, I see your hand is raised on Zoom.
Thank you.
Sure.
This is not really a city council issue other than please be aware because it may impact any money coming from the federal government. Today is the day that I receive my Social Security, and it's always on the second Wednesday. This morning it showed in my bank as pending because it's a direct deposit. I checked again at about 4:30, it was still pending. I checked just before the meeting and it is not there. It has disappeared. I will certainly follow up with the bank and Social Security and everything, but I just wanted you guys to be aware because if they are not making payments, you're going to have a whole lot of really frantic people. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish you luck.
Wow.
Thanks.
That's frightening. I don't see any other hands raised online. I'll just give it another moment. And we will move on to a public hearing on the FY26 proposed general fund operating and capital budgets. So I will open the public hearing now. And we will run through the budget presentation.
Okay. We had our community meal on the 25th, and this is our official public hearing as required by the charter. Oh, I got it all set up. Now I don't know how to change the page. Here we go. Okay. To be clear, this is the budget as we have drafted today. The council will approve the final budget that will go forward to the ballot on the 26th of February at the next meeting. So this may not necessarily be the exact same budget that folks are voting on annual meeting. The budget as drafted is a $400,000 increase over FY25. That translates to a 3% increase. What that looks like on the tax rate is a 2.5% change on the tax rate, and what that translates to for a $280,000 home is about $69 over the taxes for FY25. These are, in addition to the taxes, what the utility bills are projected to look like for FY26. So all collectively, that's about an 8.6% increase and about $250. The revenues that we have that make up the majority of the revenue for the general fund budget, 75% of that comes from residential property taxes, 11% from business property taxes, 8% from miscellaneous revenues. That's fees that we get at the community development office or the clerk's office, and then 6% specifically from Global Foundries property taxes. On the expenditure side, just a note here, we tried to sort of show this in a little bit of a different way than we've been showing it before, because we have 18 different budget categories, and it's sort of impossible to understand when you're looking at it at this scale. So these categories are how things are reported in the audit. And so we've kind of broken up the expenditure pie now in these different categories. Also, hope that it's a little bit more clear where public safety lives. So that's police, fire, and rescue. That's the biggest piece of the pie at about 30%. As a reminder, those live under the Health and Human Services budget category. That is still where it lives when you look into each of the spreadsheets in the budget. What remains in that on its own is the cemetery funds for $20,000. The other big change here is general government, admin, legislative, clerk, finance, IT, and assessing are now categorized into this general government category. That is the green piece of the pie at 16%. Then public works at 13%, and then it goes down from there. Just so that it's here, this is the old pie chart. That's a little bit less helpful. So the 18 different budget categories, just going to go through this fairly quickly. Essentially 4% salary, wage, and merit increase per the contract for FY26. So that is what's built in there. There's $50,000 for public works as well. Our health insurance rate increased for calendar year 2025 by 17%. So those are, like most folks, struggling with those increased costs. In the administrative budget, just some highlights here of what's in FY26. So we have $25,000, which is intended to support an equity position across a number of different municipalities in Chittenden County. Unfortunately, that amount of money was not able to be included in some of the other municipal budgets. Winooski and Essex Junction still has that in there, so hopefully there's something we can do to address equity going forward. The legislative budget is just under 100,000. The clerk's budget, just as a note here, the records preservation funds are used for the shelving that we have in there for about $15,000. We can't show it as a revenue side, but eventually that shakes itself out. So that budget is actually pretty flat or at -1%. Finance department covers all of the city software needs and workers' comp, unemployment, and various insurances. IT budget is at $211,000. There are some decreases made in there in terms of computer replacements. The assessing budget, so again, for FY26, that will be a shared contract with the town of Essex. That shared agreement is in place until the reappraisal is done, which at this point is now will be done in FY26, not at the end of FY25. Community development, the majority of the increase in that budget is for matching funds for grants. Economic development budget still at 0. Hopefully we can figure out what that program looks like in the future. Fire increase in pay for for higher call volume. Health and Human Services. So again, this is where you're seeing sort of police and Essex Rescue there in that budget. That's an increase of $178,000. County and regional, this is where the GMT bus service is, and it includes the special assessment that GMT has asked for from the municipalities. And the ask for GBIC is included. Streets budget, that's at 1.5 million. We worked out some of the actual time that the public works staff are working between water fund, sanitation, and the general fund for the streets budget, so that there's some shifting in there. Stormwater on the general fund side is zeroed out because the intention is to go to a stormwater utility in FY26. Brownell Library, there's some increased costs there for needed cleaning and repair and maintenance. EJRP, there are some shifts from the general fund to the program funds. We've been sort of taking a look at this and trying to make sure that fit is correct. So as an example, cleaning at Park Street School has moved to the program fund. And so essentially the users of that program are covering that cost as opposed to the general taxpayers throughout the city. Buildings, there's a number of different building budgets. Collectively, there's an increase about $12,000 for cleaning and professional services. Debt, there is a decrease there of about $16,000. Transfers and miscellaneous. So the village and now city has a well-funded, intended to be well-funded capital planning effort, and that increases every year in order to be able to keep that at a healthy rate. So that increase for FY26 is $84,000. There is also an $110,000 in there to increase the unassigned fund balance, as we have been lingering at about 7%, and best practice would be closer to 15%. Then general note, we've been aligning service contracts across departments and buildings and moving to Burlington Telecom for communication needs. So we've seen some cost decreases there by some of those efficiencies that we're seeing, which is really great. Other fund balances to point out here, there's the local option tax. We have an estimated annual revenue of $900,000. I'll just note that that is still relatively young service tax that we've got here in the city. And so that can easily vary from year to year. What is planned for spending in the budget right now is $27,500 for a rebranding effort. Some money for city banners and signs. And then for the most part, that revenue source is being used to fund the capital program. So that includes specifically under a policy that the council adopted, 25% of that going to sidewalks specifically. The Economic Development Fund, that is planned $40,000 for the Main Street Park. $90,000 for some expenses associated with the Crescent Connector project that are not federal funding eligible, and $750,000 for our Amtrak project. These are the projects that are in the capital plan for the next 5 years. There's a lot of variability to how these actually come together once we figure out the actual construction costs and moving forward on them. I'll note that the first two there are associated with Pearl Street between West Street Extension and Susie Wilson Road. Back a number of years ago, there is a preferred alternative for a road diet for that section of road. The money in the capital plan is, I'm going to say 1.2 million. That might be a little bit short. That preferred alternative was closer to about $3,000. So we will be million. Yeah.
Terribly disappointed.
Thank you.
$1,000.
Yeah, sorry.
So we also have a project going with CCRPC to look back at that preferred alternative, see if there's a way that we can bring some efficiencies to that project. And also we will be looking toward a transportation enhancement grant from VTrans. So those two are slated for FY26 in the capital plan. There's a lot of background that needs to happen with that. And so I'm not sure if FY26 is real, but we'll do our best to see what we can do with that project. It would be very, very exciting to see that come together. So also, we worked on a strategic plan this year. The staff took the pillars of that strategic plan and thought through what their annual work programs are, both for all of their ongoing work as well as how that work fits into the strategic plan, and thought through some some specific action items for FY26. This is the first time that we've done this work planning, and so the idea is that we will be reporting back on it throughout the year, and this will help feed council level discussions in the springtime so that we have direction on how to build the following year's budget. Some items to note in the FY26 work plans I will point out here. Under my task is to implement what I just said. So looking forward to that. Communications, looking at a plan for incorporating more youth members, and what lots of folks are waiting for, the switching over and rebranding for the city will be very exciting. Human resources, actively engage and contribute to a comp salary study, which we will need in FY26 to prepare us for the next association contract. Not going to read every single one of these. Brownell Library, looking forward to the 100th anniversary of Brownell in 2026. City Clerk's Office, we are looking forward to setting up as a U.S. passport agency space, so you can come into the city's offices to get a passport. Community development, looking at finishing up the transit-oriented Connect the Junction project, and moving on to the comprehensive plan. EJRP, looking at the potential for a gym facility and expansion of the senior programming now that in FY26 they'll be back into Lincoln, which will be exciting. Finance, continuing to explore added functionality within our software programs. Fire station, looking at work to think through what the future needs are at the fire station. Public Works, annual paving, and sidewalk replacement now that we've got some dedicated funds from the lot policy for that. And water quality, a lot in there, including including retrofitting 3 pump stations, which is also on our agenda for tonight, and also on the annual meeting ballot for a bond vote. Here we are tonight at the public hearing on February 22nd. We've got another engagement activity at the Brownell Library. Then on February 26th, the council's next meeting, the budget needs to be finalized and move forward to the ballot. On February 20th, that is the last day to file petitions signed by at least 5% of the voters to get an article on the ballot. March 3rd is the deadline for nominating petitions for elected positions. March 25th, we will have our informational hearing on the ballot items. And then April 8th is voting day at the Champaign Expo from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And that's it. This is just a return to the overall picture.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay. So this is a public hearing. This is an opportunity for folks here and on Zoom to ask questions about what we just discussed, the budget in general, clarifications, and that sort of thing. So if you're in Zoom land, please raise your hand. We will collect questions, and once we've gotten all the questions, we'll do our best to answer them tonight or consider what's been proposed. Is there anyone in the room that has a comment or question? Nope. Not seeing any hands on Zoom land yet. Harlan Smith.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Ken.
Great. I'm doing well, thank you.
Good.
Hey, I wanted to talk a little bit about the transfers to capital. What, and I don't have the numbers up in front of me. Is that was it 86,000 transferred to capital? Then 110 into the funding balance?
There is a proposed $110,000 transfer. There's a proposed $110,000 addition to the general fund budget for unassigned fund balance, yes.
Okay,
And then it's
and then, go ahead.
sorry, Harlan, it's $84,000 increase over the base transfer to the capital.
Okay, and capital is normally funded through a separate capital vote, is that correct? I mean, it's not generally funded by taking general fund money and moving it into the capital area, is that a correct statement? Don't we vote on a capital budget as well?
The council votes on the enterprise and program fund budget. The voters vote on the general fund budget. The capital budget is funded through a variety of different means, general fund being one of those revenue streams to the capital program. Does that make sense?
No.
No, there's not a separate line item on the ballot for capital fund.
There's not a, when I'm voting for the budgets, I'm not voting for a certain percentage of money to be directly funding the capital fund. The capital is always funded out of transfers from the general fund.
You're voting on the overall general fund amount levied against the grand list. There's no separate item there. It's all contained within that number, within that question, if that answers your question.
Yeah, and you can see in the budget, I'll try to pull it up here and find the page number, but there's a transfers tab in the general fund budget that explains what each of those dollar amounts are.
Page 72 of the, yeah, thanks. Page 72 of the packet.
Oh, page 72 of this packet. Thank
Yes,
you.
this
I
packet.
just like, I don't know why I
It's
wasn't
okay.
thinking of the budget here.
Thanks for your patience, Arlen.
That's fine. I mean, maybe it's simpler for me to figure it out this way. The overall budget that I'll be voting on is $12 million.
I believe that's the number-ish.
Yes.
Somewhere in around there.
Yep.
And that also funds our capital needs.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm showing, this is page 72 of tonight's packet. So you can see there is the capital transfer, which for FY26 in total is 643. Rolling stock transfers, 300,000. Buildings transfers, 50,000. EJRP capital transfers, 114. And then that 110 at the bottom, that's the transfer to unassigned fund balance to try to build that up.
Okay. That answers my question. I thought that there was an actual separate capital budget that gets voted on, which is also a percentage against the grand list as a separate fund for some reason I was thinking every time I voted for a budget, I was voting for our general fund budget and our capital budget. But that's incorrect.
I want to
This
say
may have been left, my thought process may have been left over from previous years where I was voting on two different budgets.
and I want to think the town, I want to say, I believe the town might be voting on a capital question, but we're not doing it that way.
Yeah, they're changing their
Okay,
Right.
process.
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I was just seeing that transfer into capital and for some reason, I was thinking capital was its own separate entity that was voted on. So my mistake, and I appreciate your patience in explaining it.
Marcus, did you have something? No? Okay.
No, I was gonna, because sometimes I'm sure when you look at the ballot, you're voting on that general fund, but at the same time, there will be those times, like we'll be talking later about the West Street project, for instance. Those kinds of things do come up on a ballot, but that's not capital.
Okay, is there anyone else that has a question or comment on this? All right, then I'm going to move that I'm going to close the public hearing. I will say that we're going to talk about the budget some more. We may or may not make some changes to it. There will be more opportunity to provide comment. I believe Regina talked about some of those in the presentation. You can do that tonight, right after we finish discussing it. So there are more opportunities to provide input. Let's see. We are just trying to find page 1. So we are on to business item 6A, discussion and consideration of the FY26 budget and capital program budgets. So right into it.
Okay. So starting on page 32 in the packet is the narrative that accompanies this version of your budget. What you've got at the top there are the changes that were made since your January 22nd meeting. As a reminder, we were able to get those changes incorporated in the draft that was presented at the community meal on January 25th. I just went through what the sort of general look of what that is and the summaries and what that translates to for the voters. Going to move down here to talk about the stormwater utility in a little bit more detail. So I'm bringing up this kind of summary of it tonight because on the 26th is our last sort of drop dead time period. If we do not intend to move forward with the utility, we've got to get this funding into the general fund. Otherwise, we will not have any funding for stormwater program in FY26. We will be bringing all of the parts of the stormwater utility back to you on February 26th. And so you'll have answers to the various questions and things that we have been thinking through from the staff side since we've received feedback on the utility. And essentially thinking through that, it is still staff's perspective that we should move forward with this as a utility. Part of that reason is because it takes a look at the real impact from a property-based impervious surface standpoint, as opposed to the value of the property, which is how your taxes are determined. The other reason being all properties, whether churches or schools or CVE, anybody contributing from to the stormwater system, this applies to across the board. Also, just put in a table here because I know it was confusing between what stormwater looked like in the FY25 general fund versus the how we're showing that as the utility. And that's because we are anticipating getting the utility started up at some point in FY25. And so that dollar amount is a higher number. So that comparison is at the top here. At this stage of the game, our thinking is that we just very cleanly end the general fund funding of the stormwater program at the end of FY '25. The general fund zeroes out for the stormwater budget in FY '26, and we move completely to the utility. And that program amount would be $448,000 for FY '26. We would start to bill that through the utility bills starting in October, and it would show up 3 times, just like within the water bill that you get now, 3 times a year. Let me just quick look through here. The other change that we are looking at is that originally we were looking at the stormwater utility, that Global Foundries would not, would essentially be exempt from that. That is no longer our thinking as we have thought through this in more detail. So we have communicated that with Global Foundries last week. And so we wanted to give them some time to kind of think on this before we bring this whole back to you folks at your next meeting. I think that's the main highlights.
And there's forgive me if you brought this up, there is the thought that the increase is rather sudden, so.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Better than I can.
Yeah. So the other thing that we are, some of the feedback that we got, this is, it is a big dollar amount for some folks with larger properties and larger amounts of impervious surface. So we are thinking that there might be some logic in phasing this in. And so the easiest way to do that is that $448,000 budget proposed for FY '26 includes $125,000 that would go to capital for stormwater projects. The simplest way to phase is to not start that capital funding effort in the first year. So that 448 would decrease by 125. The first year of the program is a lower amount that we are collecting. In FY '27, we add in that capital amount. And so it sort of takes that jump, but we get 2 years to get to the real amount that we need to do going forward.
I've heard that a couple times, so is there any?
I'd just like to hear the thinking around Global Foundries.
Chelsea's with us. She knows this better than I do.
I could just read it right from the document you're gonna get in a couple weeks here. Hello. So let me just find the right question here. Here it is. Stormwater utility is designed to provide a more equitable and sustainable solution for managing stormwater runoff across the community in our MS4 program, which is mandated to meet regulatory requirements that go beyond infrastructure needs alone. These regulations ensure that we can effectively manage stormwater quality and quantity, address environmental concerns, prevent flooding in our community. Additionally, Global Foundries has been providing ongoing support of the stormwater department through property taxes, as it has been in the general fund. The shift of this program out of the general fund and into a stormwater utility or enterprise fund is part of a broader, more equitable system that ensures all properties contribute fairly to the maintenance and enhancement of the stormwater infrastructure, regardless of the property size or usage. The system aims to distribute the cost of stormwater management in a way that is fair and consistent as possible while ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements. Further research and legal review over the course of this year found that there are no exemptions from stormwater utility except for agriculture due to a bill enacted by the state of Vermont legislator.
At one point, you were thinking that Global Foundries would be exempt, but after further research, you determined that they are not exempt. That's basically it.
That's basically it.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
And the fact that they have their own wastewater treatment plant on site is not relevant to this conversation because we're talking stormwater.
Yes.
Got it.
And part of this is the way that the state of Vermont is addressing stormwater is through a variety of sectors, is how they're calling it. So there's 3-acre permits. That's what CVE and the school districts have to comply with. There are road standards that is wrapped into our MS4 permit for stormwater. And Global Foundries has their own permitting for industrial type uses. Regardless of all of that, the city of Essex Junction is responsible for phosphorus coming out of all of the land within our jurisdictional area. The state's approach over time will look at the level of phosphorus in Lake Champlain. If we are successful and succeeding at the work that we've done, it, in theory, could reduce the burden on all of those sectors. Chances are we're likely to just come up with other pollutants that we have to be starting to address and think through in these systems. So our, for better or worse, this is like a really tricky way even for me to think about it. It's our burden, our regulatory burden does not change if everybody, all of these sectors are effectively reducing phosphorus. So on the very front end thinking of it, no one should be exempt. But we do have the credit system that's in place. And so once properties are actually built, their best management practices and managing their stormwater on the property themselves, they will get a credit. They can request a credit and we will look at the credit and apply that to the system, as opposed to anybody at the very beginning of setting this whole program up being exempt, if that's helpful.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Bruce?
So thinking about, again, the adjustment on capital. So the primary reasoning here is because we're doing a gentler phased approach to getting into this utility. I think the thing that I'm struggling with is the fact that when I think about generally the budget and how it's been constructed and some of our logic around this, this amount for capital for stormwater is a known and predictable event. Our unfunded or our unassigned fund balance is a protection against an unknown event. So there's a portion of me that thinks it doesn't feel like the logic stands, because we need to cover these expenses. We need to be able to cover this cost in the future. We know it's going to come. We're trying to cover our backsides with and again, I'm not trying to sacrifice one for the other, but I just want to be consistent. I try to be consistent in my logic around the things that I'm kind of agreeing to as a counselor with this budget.
Let me ask a clarifying question.
Yeah, go
just to
for it.
move this along. Are you suggesting, either one of you are suggesting that we don't do capital at all, or that capital comes out of general fund and still gets paid? Does that make sense? So instead of capital coming out, so the stormwater budget technically wouldn't zero out. And my question is, would it be the 125 still coming general fund to like it would?
Our current thinking, correct me anybody out there, Jess, Chelsea, if I'm wrong, our current thinking is that we would not cover, in FY26, we would not cover 125,000 for capital for stormwater. Period. We would essentially be waiting a year to build the capital funds needed for stormwater improvement projects.
It's no different than how I'm running the budget right now. I don't have a capital budget for stormwater. I need one, but it would just be continuing how we're currently operating and doing some small compliance projects within the operating budget.
Go ahead, sorry.
And just to clarify, that's not to say we couldn't do that. It is possible that we can put 125,000 in the capital fund, and then that's an oranges to oranges question to what you just said. That is possible. The struggle with the stormwater utility phasing is that it is just a large number for some particular properties, and it just is big. And so there's a phasing there that could be helpful from that perspective, because it's impervious surface based as opposed to property value based, which is evened out differently.
For properties that have mitigation that are going to apply for a credit, would that be able to apply in the first year? Is that the thinking? Okay, so they wouldn't have to wait till after the first year.
Correct.
And I know we're sort of time limited on this, but I guess the question that comes up after what you asked, Marcus, is that I'm curious to see for these 4 or 5 larger properties, like what does this 125 really look like for them in terms of assistance? I guess anything is beneficial, so I'm not really second guessing it. I'm just trying to, I guess, for me, kind of make that, like, do we do both? Or do we, I'm a little, you've consistently for all these years said, we really could use a stormwater capital budget. So I think I'm kind of feeling like a little hesitancy there. I think when you explained this to me the first time, I was thinking, oh, we would just do it this different way. But now I'm realizing we're not funding it at all for a year. So don't have to decide tonight. I'm just trying to get my head around that.
So just to also understand the landscape a little bit, Chelsea, let me ask this question, because I know that there's a credit system, but that credit system has also a minimum. They can only get up to 50%, if I recall, right? So, but on a property like Global Foundries, which has been known recently to make adjustments to their property to adapt to altering utilities and trying to manage their utility costs, is there a way that a place like Global Foundries could mitigate the stormwater in such a way that it has little to no impact on our facilities, in such a way that they could potentially, and again, because of the fact that they're mitigating at such a level that that there would be a logic to where they should be due or owe, a higher discount, say, for instance, because again, the impact is so low on the city because they're mitigating it there on property, for instance. And I say that because maybe there's a way to work with properties like this to mitigate that there versus on our own systems.
So we can certainly look at the 50% credit. It could be something different than 50%. I would not advocate that credit is, that there is a different method of that credit for different properties. It should be a very clear credit system against the state stormwater manual. You do best management practices as defined in that manual, you get the credit. The city of Essex Junction is responsible for phosphorus and stormwater management within our entire jurisdictional boundary, period.
Another way to think about that
Third point I wanted to
we still have to have the staff capacity,
Yes.
budget, person, all of that has to be in place regardless of whether Champlain Valley Exposition, Global, the school district mitigates 70% or 30%. So our expense, just giving the credits to my head means that I, as a homeowner, then I'm going to pay more.
Yeah.
And I don't have an opportunity for, so there is a base level property that's not going to get any cheaper. and the more credits that are given out, those base level properties go up. And the staff and the budget is all remaining exactly the same because the need is the same. The mitigation doesn't help it. You know, I'm kind of trying to get my head around it by saying it out loud. Sorry. It's not really answering you. I'm just trying to talk it out. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like, so, you know, the ERU right now for residents is somewhere at $84. If 3 properties get a 50% credit, I'm guessing I'll be over 100 for my house. And at some point, I sort of wish we had a little more time to kind of play those scenarios out, but, you know, because I don't want to come to a point personally in 4 years when some of these properties have had a chance. We've had 4 years of expenses going up and the budget going up because it will. And then all of a sudden I've gone from $84 with 3% increases every year to up in the low hundreds because so many other properties have thankfully done the mitigation and gotten credits. And we're already seeing 15% increases on our utilities generally, and increased transfers to capital. So I'm a little nervous giving too many credits away too quickly. And from what I've heard in discussions before, the more you start exempting and crediting, the less effective the utility becomes on the whole.
I get that. I think about these large properties, though, that have the potential means to mitigate the problem on site, seem to be willing to manage and handle that on their own. Obviously, we would still, because it's our responsibility, we would need oversight in some variety. So maybe it's not zero, but I'm just wondering if there's a way with this that you can encourage a property like that to do that work.
1 second, Tim. Chelsea, let's say a CVE wanted to effectively manage their stormwater to the point where it would be silly to levy something against them. What kind of expense and facility and treatment modality would they need to mitigate to such a high level that we don't have to think about their runoff at all? It's not just putting a pond in, right? It's
I don't think,
I guess what I'm wondering is there a way, is there a financial way that a private entity would get to a point where they basically covered their responsibility? And that would be cost effective against paying what we're charging them. Do you know what I mean? You probably can't figure it out, but
don't have the answer for you at the moment about that. I will say regarding the credit system, when talking with other communities recently, and maybe this will be different for Essex Junction, very few people use it. Like most municipalities have maybe 3 credits applied.
How many businesses or properties are we talking about?
no. I was just saying just a second. It's all right. No, go ahead.
You
No,
had
keep
your
going.
hand. Well, sorry about
Finish your
that.
thought.
How many properties are we talking about when it comes to, you know, reducing by 125,000 to offset how many properties? Is it global in the CVE? Are there others?
I think I'm following your question.
My understanding is that this adjustment is being proposed to help the larger properties that have more mitigation and more impervious surface to help them manage the cost because it's a sudden large cost.
Yes.
So how many properties are we talking about?
It's 3 main properties, but one is the school system, which is many properties.
That was it, thanks.
And so I just want to follow along, bear with me. The stormwater utility fund is 400,000 and change. The rate for the utility is $84 for one equivalent residential unit. Do we have an idea? Has anybody figured out how many equivalent residential units the Global Foundries property is if they're to receive? Can I have that information? And if they applied for a credit of 50%, what that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking to see if they're, because until this point, until this meeting, we've heard that we thought they were going to be exempt and the rate was $84. So if we're then bringing that property into the fold and it is how many equivalent residential units, what does that do to the rate? And then what does that do to Global Foundries as far as money that, is there's $800,000 in property tax, a $400,000 stormwater utilities, 4% on the,
So Chelsea, is that something that you said you had, or is that something we should talk about next meeting?
and I'm sorry if I'm off on it.
No, it's a good question. So Global Foundries specifically, with the utility at 448,000 is 108,000 fee. Without the 125,000 capital, it's 78,000.
So that makes a difference for the ramp up.
Yeah.
Amber? Oh, sorry, yeah, Lieutenant.
Yeah. And so we can, like, this is why I feel badly that we're bringing this to you guys in this way, because we do have the bigger picture that we can bring and what that does to the ERU rate for regular properties. It's close. We've been talking about 84. It goes closer to like 66 or something like that. And so you can start to see a little bit like what happens the more these sort of credit systems come into play and how much that sways from kind of one side to the other. But the bottom line is correct. The program costs what the program costs.
And is there an option then, if it brings it down to 60 some odd dollars, is there an option for the three larger properties that we're talking about to receive the lower rate and one like an equivalent residential unit? We've been talking about 84. If it's down at 60, can we move it to 72? Does that make an impact? No?
Well, it would make an impact.
Yeah,
I mean,
but-
as a
I don't know.
there's a
just-
logic to the
Well,
average
they-
residential size. I mean, I wouldn't advocate for a small homeowner deal.
Yeah,
I mean,
well-
Global gets other, we have to remember too, but Global,
Yeah, it's just.
Global pays the wholesale rate for water. I mean, they get some pass-through
Yeah,
discounts.
no,
but
you're absolutely right.
the regular
As soon as I
homeowner
said
doesn't
I
get-
stopped talking.
No, these are great, these are excellent questions and we have to talk about
I
it.
just, you know, I hate to leave the unfunded capital of $125,000 for yet another year. But at the same time, you know, $75,000 ramp is,
Yeah, and I think, you know, for tonight, bringing this up so that it's not so much to digest at your next meeting. And really just to relay this kind of bigger issue that if we are not going utility any way, shape, or form, which we are not recommending, but if we were, we've got to really adjust the general fund in a big way. So I think these are excellent questions and we can,
Let me get Amber in
Yeah.
real quick. Amber, what do you have before we accidentally move on?
No, I was basically just gonna say what Regina said. I think that the ask for us tonight as it relates to the stormwater, if I'm correct, is whether we want to keep this as a utility, as an enterprise fund, or if we want to move it back into the general fund. We are gonna have a full discussion about the stormwater utility, the credits, all that stuff, at the next meeting. But I
Yeah,
think
these
these are all great questions. I agree.
So we can either make that decision now, or we can talk about the rest of the budget implications and come back to it at the end of this discussion, but there's other FY26 topics.
I would like to keep it as a utility because of the fact that I think that that direct relationship between impact and use, or impact and, you know, covering the cost of what we need to do statutorily is important. So, and clear for the residents. So I think it would be the better way to go.
I would agree.
Amber, what are you thinking generally?
I agree with keeping it as the enterprise fund.
Too. All right. And so we all feel like we've had enough background on this that we can have a better discussion and be comfortable with this at least for another couple weeks. Great. Okay.
okay. So couple of other things that are in this memo as additional budget items for consideration for FY '26. I'm going to also look at a couple of other things from today. Sorry. One second. Okay, so new information, your county tax for FY '26. We had that in the budget as a 3% increase over FY '25. That is actually a 26% increase. So that's going to go up to 73,911 for a $15,000 increase. So we don't have much say.
What is the basis of the increase?
I am not entirely sure. We can find out more information. Yeah. There's information that shows the differences between FY '25 and FY '26, but there's not a lot of narrative that sort of explains what's going on there. The other thing that we've got going on, just to keep in mind, is the 2 Lincoln renovation project. We will come forward with an update on that probably in March, but just keep in mind for the lot fund, that shows about 670,000 at the end of FY '25. And it is likely that we will need to use a good percentage of that for the 2 Lincoln project. Not sure exactly what that dollar amount is. It's certainly not all of it, but it is a component. So just keep that in the back of your mind. We have also got news and know that the TOD Connect the Junction project is funded through a RAISE grant through CCRPC that is on pause. So the original contract amount has about $10,000 remaining in it. There was a point in time before the pause that CCRPC thought they could put more money towards our project that we were looking forward to. And that's closer to about $35,000. We have been looking at that in relation to the budget, but that's really an FY '25 dollar amount that we would want to consider if we can figure out how to make up that difference, as opposed to just stop the project right now and that's it, or continue to pause and wait to see if things turn around there. And it's the Economic Development Fund. There is a good amount of room in that fund to be able to cover that $35,000 if we needed it in full. Hopefully we would just, hopefully this will be temporary. We use the city funds to keep it moving. And then if things change and CCRPC can come back to the table, they have been clear, they will not be able to reimburse us for any work done in this time period. But when if the pause is lifted, then they can come back to the table and keep going with the work. Other things, questions that we have had is for the comprehensive plan work in FY '26. What if we can't get the municipal planning grant that we're planning to get with a match that we've got in the general fund? I would say we will look to the same place, the Economic Development Fund, to be able to help support that work. And it should be fine, even if it ends up being a full $35,000 for the TOD project, plus the municipal planning grant is $30,000. So that would be the most that we could get from that grant program anyway. Okay, those were the other parts. Let me just go back to my memo. So that was a little bit more information than the Connect the Junction, where I was kind of thinking about it for FY26. It's really more a FY25 issue. For the lot fund, just as a reminder, we were originally thinking of the rebranding project at $40,000. We reduced that because we ended up using some of that fund for the strategic planning project. So rebranding is down to 27.5. I would still recommend that we increase that back up to 40,000, but big picture, my priority is to Lincoln. And would be okay if we made the rebranding effort work at 27.5. Then last item on this list is number 3 here, Essex Rotary. They have some, Elaine could probably explain this better than me, but Essex Rotary helps support the Heavenly Food Pantry. And they have some needs, bigger needs this year, like a new refrigerator and some other things that they are working on. And so they have a request to the city for some funds to help support that work. As we have talked previously about other social service asks, we don't have a good solid system and program in place to help decide what we can do and can't do. Also, just a point that this particular ask is actually really for now. It's not really FY26 ask. The ask is they need help with this program right now. So if you'd like, we can sort of think about that separately from your actual FY26
I mean,
budget.
in that respect, it's not really warned for
Yeah,
Right.
right.
this discussion, so why don't we just hold on that,
Yeah.
if that's all right? So to sum up, you're feeling confident that we don't need to allocate FY26 money for TOD or comprehensive plan?
Yes.
What else? I was listening. Help me out if you know. If anybody knows,
Yeah.
just yell it out.
The
Yell it out.
branding effort could remain at 27.5,
Right.
or we could bump it up to 40.
I will say that I expressed in a different conversation, it is about just, changing signs and letterhead and stamps and all kinds of different things that need an inventory, and people need to be creative about, like, looking for everything that needs to be changed. But it also is sort of, in our conversations on this board all along, for merger or separation, it was always acknowledged that the logo will need a reimagination, that there might be a new mission statement or vision statement, and that some other things might be addressed. That reminder of that conversation was received with a raised eyebrow, that I don't know that 27.5 will facilitate that kind of conversation. So I would advocate for getting it back up to a point where there might at least be an opportunity for some community input, and maybe some, versioning and at least presenting of our visual representation, whether that be logo and flags and things like that, we've all, I don't know if a few of us have heard input on the current logo and modernizing that in a way that represents the city differently. That's one thing that can be surprisingly expensive, especially if you're trying to get input. So that is all just to say, it might be a good idea to make sure we're prepared for that with the extra 12,500 to get us up to 40.
So to be clear, for the rebranding effort, we're talking about engagement, design, and then production implementation across the board for 40,000 or 27.
We're being closer. It's hard to predict, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Feels like a heavy pill to swallow for $40,000.
You mean a lot of work for 40,000, or 40,000 is not enough or too much?
40,000 sounds like a lot of money for a logo. From the standpoint of what you were talking about, mission statement, other things like that, I'm not sure that I would bucket that in with this, because I think when I think of rebranding, I'm really thinking about, you know, like, so from a corporate standpoint, it would obviously include all kinds of design elements, like here's our colors, here's our official colors, here's our official fonts, like all these pieces. Do we need that? I don't know if we need all those pieces that I typically have seen and experienced in my own experience in being part of rebrands in corporate life. But I would like to see engagement around what they would like to see from this logo that identifies who we are. I would like to see that. So obviously then there will have to be a design element, and then yes, there will have to be production, because then it has to go on signage and everything else. But
This include the hard goods?
I think we have that separately.
Okay.
Yeah, and this, I think we researched what this would cost. Must have been a year to almost 2 years ago, when we came up with the $40,000, because it was probably or roughly last year when we realized we had to reduce that to get the strategic planning contract up to what it needed to be. So just when I was going back through and looking at this, I was like, oh, we probably, for what we were thinking, we probably need closer to that 40,000. Because that effort didn't change. We just needed the funding for the other effort. So,
But, so I guess, yeah, the 5 signs that welcome people on the 5 roads in to the village, that's not part of that.
yeah, I think that's separate. And this is, it's really a note. You don't need to decide this tonight. You can decide it on the 26th, then we change the note under the lot fund.
I guess I'm just generally feeling like this was spent a lot to get a lot of little pieces that have now been added into this list. We had some pretty thoughtful and hearty discussions that got us to where we were in our most recent discussions, and adding the unassigned fund balance and such. And then here we're just more being added to this pot. So I'm not feeling great about this moment.
Well,
So I
in
just
reality,
want,
it's one thing, because the other things are off the list because they're current. So it's the one,
yeah.
as far as I understand it. So it's not really a list. There's one addition to of 12,500 to make sure that we can.
Well, and
It sounds
the
like-
county and, so,
Those are uncontrollables. But yes, they're
So-
additions, yeah.
yeah, so. So nothing else, all I'll say about it right now is it just doesn't feel great, but for right now, leave it be.
I am personally relieved that that it sounds like we have a plan to keep those other 2 programs running.
Yeah.
CRD and the other, so. So it doesn't sound like we're going to decide that tonight. So they're really, aside from the incorporating the county tax into the new figure, that needs to be done. Going back to Zoom here to see. Amber, did you have anything you wanted to add, change, or suggest, or modify?
Not at this time, thanks.
Sure. So it looks like the one change we will make tonight is that county tax. Is that what folks are thinking? Okay. And may or may not come back to the rebranding, which is totally fine. May or may not, we'll be discussing the stormwater and may or may not come back to kind of a capital conversation versus, I hate to use the word versus, or, you know, whether that will be impact the fund balance addition next time. Okay. Are we okay as a council? Should we see if there's any public comment at this point? We're good, it's a good spot. Is there anyone in the room or anyone on Zoom that has any comments or questions about what they just heard, this discussion, the budget in general for next year? Please raise your hand if you're on Zoom or let me know in the room. I don't see anyone in the room. So we'll give it a moment. Harlan, go for it.
Yeah, there was a question that I wanted to ask about that, the transfer into the fund balance, $110,000. We've been hanging out around 7%. Can somebody tell me what that addition to that fund balance will be? What percentage that gets us up to?
Jess?
So the loaded question, Harlan. It depends on a couple factors. So I did have a projection and I'm trying to pull it up while I'm talking. The two big factors that affect that percentage are what do we actually end up with at the end of a fiscal year? And then what is the next year's budget? So right now, those two things are basically unknown at this point. But the projection that I had done a couple meetings ago for just reflective purposes, if we raised or if we added 116,000, so just a little over what we're doing, it would bring the percentage up to 8.
Okay.
So figure probably 100 to 120,000 buys us 1% each year.
Right. And we do not know what the fund balance for 2025 is, right?
Right.
So it could be a little bit different, could end up being at 8.25.
Mhm.
Hopefully it's not going less than 8.
Right.
And then to get off from the budget a little bit, there was some conversations about stormwater and you didn't take public input at that time. Was there or is there to be no public input on stormwater at this point?
I mean, you can make a comment. We're going to talk about it again, and there will be a public hearing again for it. Every material change to the program will bring another public hearing, and we'll certainly be discussing it next time. But if you have a question on it now, we did talk about it tonight. We're happy to take your question and see if we can answer it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I haven't really read up on the whole utility and how it's going to work out, but I'm curious about municipal properties. So will we be paying into the stormwater with our own personal residents? And then also, will each of the municipal properties be paying in through the general fund, right? Will I see a line item where we're going to be transferring money from the general fund into the storm utility to cover the municipal properties?
Yes.
Harlan, it's in that same, if you look in the budget packet, that transfers miscellaneous sheet where the capital transfers show up.
Yep.
There is a new line for stormwater fees in the general fund budget. Right now, definitely going to change probably for the better. The stormwater fees are projected at 7,800 coming from the general fund to the stormwater fund. There are also some fees within the wastewater fund because we broke these up since it's by parcel essentially. If there are stormwater fees associated with properties that are actually occupied by the enterprise funds, those fees show up in their respective fund as well.
Okay. And then I'm not sure if Chelsea's still with us or if you can all answer this. The impervious surfaces, are those the structures as well? Or are we only talking about parking lots, driveways, paved surface and other impervious surfaces other than the structures themselves?
It's structures and all of those services you mentioned.
Okay, so an interesting thing, and then we're talking about credits or ways of mitigating potentially some of these fees for the larger properties. And obviously, you all know I'm very familiar with Maple Street. The Maple Street buildings, the gutters go into the center walkway, which goes into a drain, which goes into catch basins, which bleed into the ground. Would those pervious surfaces be a reduction? Would they not be included because they're all going into catch
No, they're-
basins?
They're included with the calculation. That's the information I need to decide how much of a credit that parcel would get.
Okay. And then there's the large apartment complex. Oh God, I used to live there years ago and I can't even remember the name of it. Across the railroad tracks near Rocky's Pizza, or across the street from Rocky's Pizza. They've got some, what's that? Yeah. They've actually, when they built that, they've got settling ponds for their parking lots. Is that correct?
Probably.
And those would be considered a credit, correct?
Most likely, yep.
Okay. I was just curious because you guys were talking about some of these other properties as to how they might mitigate this a little bit. And I was just thinking of those two particular items, that those are mitigations for those properties. So thank you. Starting to understand it a little better. Appreciate the information.
Is there anyone else on Zoom that has a question, comment about the budget for FY26? I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll bring it back to the board. Anything else from anyone? Regina, do you have anything else you need on this?
I do not.
Okay. Then I think we can move on. Discussion and consideration of the necessity resolution for the West Street, River Street, and Maple Street pump station retrofit bond vote and Clean Water State revolving fund application.
Yes.
We have Chelsea here for that again.
I think this is the longest memo I've written in a long time. But yeah, so about a year, I think it was a year ago, I came to you all talking about our pump stations and how they have not received the same amount of attention as the wastewater facility, and more than half are in desperate need of attention. The three here that are being asked to be part of a bond vote are probably the most critical at this point in time. And the reason we are asking for a bond vote is because the sanitation capital fund has been underfunded for some time now, and there's just not enough for today's costs to meet the need of retrofitting these stations. So the one benefit is the West Street pump station. So that was installed in 1968. It did receive its last upgrade in 1983, but it's one of our larger stations. A recent study from Hamlin showed that the collection system was in good shape, but we already knew this, is that the pump station is undersized right now. So the station, as part of this project, we would increase its capacity. So it needs a full replacement essentially, and it would be brought to be more above ground, which will help with safety. New control panel, flow meter, and emergency generator. And then I'll talk about the cost sharing that we have with the town in a moment. But then we have River and Maple Street. These are our oldest stations. They both were installed in 1973 and have received no internal upgrades. So they are long overdue for retrofits. They're pretty unique style pump station that is really hard to troubleshoot. So we're looking to retrofit these into, they'd have new wet wells with 2 submersible pumps. So that would allow, again, more safety related features engineered in. We need new controls as well. And then I just went over reasons why, but I think I've already really talked about that. But these stations are beyond their life expectancy. Normally, stations are already built to only last 25 years, and all 3 of these are past that. They will be more efficient. And then it's also to ensure public safety. So moving on to the costs. The current ask for the bond is 3.8 million. But we're looking to bid these projects as 2 separate projects due to cost sharing of the West Street project with the town of Essex. So we have agreement with the town of Essex called the 2-party agreement, and it outlines how we share costs for shared collection systems and pump stations. And so West Street and Susie Wilson Pump Station are the 2 stations we share with the town of Essex. And so this retrofit falls in part of that agreement. The 2-party agreement was written in 1975, and it has not been updated since then, except for when there was a retrofit to Susie Wilson Road Pump Station in 2000. And that was just an amendment for this specific project. So we will be looking to do the same thing for this project, and then work on rewriting the 2-party agreement and updating it with the town after that. So for the longest time, the cost share for the West Street Pump Station has been split 75% the town of Essex, 25% the city, and we haven't reassessed those flows in a really long time. There's currently no flow meter on West Street Pump Station, but there will be after this project. So what we did is we looked at pump run hours and pumping rates, known pumping rates of the pumps to determine what the flow is today. And that showed that the flow proportions have shifted to 70% the town of Essex and 30% the city. So West Street is being projected to be $2.5 million. We did put a little bit of a buffer in that cost because these haven't been engineered yet. So in knowing that this station is our biggest, we want to make sure we have enough and do not under bond for it. And then Maple and River Street, the idea is that because those are gonna be the same style stations, if we go out as those 2 as one project, we could have some cost savings. So that project's looking to be 1.3 million. And that would be paid 100% by the city. We are applying to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. We did that last year, and we did receive word that we were granted the funds, but because we hadn't had a bond vote yet, we couldn't move forward. So we were taken off the list, and so we just have to reapply that we want to be on the priority list by Friday. So that's another ask for tonight. And then you'll see my recommendations at the bottom, which is to allow the bond vote to be added to the ballot. And then we have to do a resolution of necessity for the pump stations.
Thank you.
Jess has a little bit of information to share as well.
All right, so I did receive from our contact at the state an amortization schedule on Monday. So I was able to update the sanitation capital fund reserve to sort of illustrate the 3.8 million and the town's share of that debt service accurately. So it works in the city's favor for a couple different reasons, better than what we had originally projected. So we were originally projecting almost a 4% interest rate on a loan because when we first started working on this, we were thinking just a regular bond vote. So the good news is that the state revolving fund does not charge an interest rate. Rather, they charge an admin fee, and it's just 2%. So although the principal amount that we need to borrow increased, the reduction that we're seeing in the interest or the admin fee offset that. Also updated the town's share of debt. We had estimated it lower than it actually is, so it's been updated to that 70-30 split. So Regina, can I share my screen?
Sorry.
Cool. Great. All right. I know it's really, really tiny. But can you guys see those yellow highlighted lines? Those are the two that we're looking at.
We can see that
so-
they're yellow.
Okay, I'll try to make them a little bit bigger. So the way that the state revolving loans work is that they are a set payment per year. So you can see that the payment that we've got plugged in on based on that new schedule is $232,396 per year. Of that, $107,041 would be coming from the town for their share of the West Street pump station. So I can't really smush these side by side for you guys to see, but the ending balances that we had projected each year going forward, the ending balances have increased over the original projections. So our fund balance is actually looking better than anticipated, even with this loan incorporated.
There's a line, 2 lines below the first highlighted line. Is that our transfer increase every year?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that was my original
Yep.
comment about that sustainability, but can you go back to the right? How much are we increasing a year based on that thought process? 50?
50,000. Yep. And so you can see, I mean, there is a little bit of room now that not in the first year, but definitely years out that we could potentially decrease that $50,000 down to, 20 or 30 and potentially still stay somewhat solvent, although we know that a lot of these projects that are coming up are just going to get more expensive and obviously finding more projects all the time. Same issue with every other capital fund.
But I'm generally concerned about that, counting on that increase being possible at the level that it is. That gets to be a faster share of the overall general fund or the overall budget quicker than, yeah, it gets incredibly large, incredibly fast. So I'd just love to see us have different scenarios as we talk about this stuff moving forward where it stops. The increases stop. I don't mean the contribution, obviously. I just mean like, let's say in the FY29 number, that's the number for a while.
Yeah.
Unless things are different economically for us. And then we just have to figure out what we do from there. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm really,
It really does.
so anyway, I don't know, for this bond vote, I don't know that that's really relevant right now.
Right.
So whenever we look at this, I just sort of be like, I get a little shiver. But
Roger.
I am encouraged at the town's contribution and the ratio there, I think is a real help in this case. Sorry, Elaine.
I just have two questions. So the town's contribution is coming through the two-party agreement that Chelsea referred to. So we're bonding on it, but we don't need any additional approvals from the town to incur that cost? Does the select board need to see it too?
So we looked at this a bit, Jess, and I don't remember the full answers, but so they're our projects. We need to go and get the bond for the projects in full. So we've got to ask the voters to go into that debt. On the town side, how they want to pay off that debt is on their end. And if it's not coming from a bonding perspective, then they don't need to go to the voters to ask for that. They've got the dollar amounts worked out. They're fully aware of this project. And so they've got those projections as well.
Okay, so there's just not any extra steps we have to go through to, before we go to bond, because it's all us doing the bonding, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question I have is, all these materials were excellent, but there's no discussion about what the cost is for the taxpayer. You know, like, we've got the utility tax, we've got the property tax. How much is it going to cost our residents to cover the cost of this bond? So I think I saw a chart that said, you know, for a $280,000 house, the total increase in FY26 is $243, but then we would need to add this.
No, this is the enterprise fund, Elaine. So it has nothing to do with the tax rate. This would be built in and is built into the current rate that we are estimating at this point for the sanitation fund.
No, thank you.
That's great.
Yeah.
Quick question, is this on the town side, knowing the fact that they're gonna have to, whatever, but do they have this built into their budget for this upcoming year? Because obviously our timelines for when we have to approve our budget and move this thing forward is different than theirs. They've already solidified theirs for the ballot.
Not on their enterprise fund side.
Okay.
This is not part of their general fund.
Tim, Amber, anything on this?
I'm good, that really covered.
Okay,
Nothing from me, thanks.
great. All right, so are we at a good point where we can take some comments or questions on this, do we think? All right, if there's no one in the room, so if there's anyone online that has a question or comment on this topic, now would be the time to bring them up. Just raise your hand on Zoom, and if you can't find out how to do that, just simply unmute and ask your question. I am not seeing any hands, not hearing anyone jump in, so I'm going to bring it back to the board. We do have an ask from staff on the bottom of page 102 of the packet, 2 asks, if we're amenable. Great.
I move the council adopt a resolution that the public interest or necessity demands the retrofit of 3 pump stations in the city located on West Street, Maple Street, and River Street, and that the $3.8 million will be too great to be paid out of the ordinary annual income and revenue, and a proposition of incurring a bonded debt to pay for public improvements will be submitted to the qualified voters of the city at the annual city election on April 8th, 2025.
I'll second. We'll do the first one. Yeah, sure. Sorry. I was just thinking we'd do it like, that's fine. We could do it either way. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great. That first motion passes.
I move that the city council authorize the city manager to resubmit the priority list application to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund state fiscal year 2026 for final design and construction of the retrofit projects of the 3 pump stations, West Street, Maple Street, and River Street.
Great. Awesome. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Amber, we couldn't hear you.
Aye.
Awesome, great. Both motions passed unanimously. Thank you, Chelsea, Jess, and Regina for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, Chelsea. Thank you. You too, Jess.
All right, back to page 1. Moving right along. 6C, discussion of initial draft of the informational hearing and annual meeting warning and ballot questions.
So this is page 107 in your packet. The draft warning is included. So the warning is for both the informational hearing that we will hold on March 25th. Just as a reminder, for the last 2 years, I think, we held that virtually only. But since the open meeting rules have changed, we have to have a hybrid meeting. So that is warned as both for March 25th and then the full annual meeting warning for Tuesday, April 8th. So the articles will be the budget itself, that bond vote for the pump stations, and then there is one council member seat. New for the city is a Champlain Water District Commission elected commissioner for a 3-year term, and one library trustee for a 5-year term.
Okay, great. Any questions?
On the Champlain Water District Commissioner, that this is an elected position. I guess I don't know from this particular position for people to understand, like, what is this role that people are going to see for the first time?
So the Champlain Water District is a municipal utility like many of our other regional entities, like the Chittenden Solid Waste District. The way the commissioner and board works for the Champlain Water District, each municipality within that within the district has a elected member. Prior to the city being the city, the village and the town had one elected member. So it won't necessarily be completely unfamiliar to folks. They would have just voted on it on the town side. Now we have 2 separate members, one for the town and one for the city.
Have we done any sort of marketing or messaging on this and the availability? Are we counting on the district to do that? Or is anyone doing it?
Excellent question.
Because I imagine only the wonkiest of us. and then even then. So I just wonder, they do represent us, if there's a way to kind of do a little bit of a push and maybe get them to help.
Yeah.
This question came up and has come up for me over and over with some of the boards that we represent, Green Mountain Transit, CSWD, like, you haven't sent us a member. Have you marketed it? We will too, but so, yeah. I've seen nothing, and I'm fairly awake to all this stuff from the district, so.
Yeah, look into that.
And there's no ask for this for us tonight, just we'll make this warning next week or next meeting. Great.
Yeah.
I don't think this is one of those items that would take public comment, but I'll give it a minute if anyone on Zoom wants to ask a question about this or has a comment. And I'm not seeing any hands up or anyone unmuting, so we will come back. We are looking at 3 executive sessions and a deliberative session for a dog bite hearing, our next agenda items. So I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Great. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Manager report, council member comments. Anything fun from the manager tonight?
Well, one, just keep your eyes open in your inboxes because that bond vote resolution will be distributed around for signature. So postcards will be going out for residents to request mailed ballots. So we are not automatically, universally mailing ballots this year. So postcards are going out. You can also call the clerk's office to request a mailed ballot. You can email the clerk's office to request a mailed ballot. You can go on the Secretary of State's website and request a mailed ballot. So there's a number of different ways to do this. When the postcard shows up, there's a portion of the postcard that you could pull off, fill out, and send back in. Reminder that city offices will be closed on Monday for President's Day. Also, we tested out webinars for the council meetings a couple weeks ago, and we are going to stick with meetings at this stage of the game. The webinars are just a bit bulky, and it kind of seems a little bit more chaotic between which type of meeting we're having. We do have the webinar feature. So for other types of engagement events, we might use that. In order to have made that effectively work for council meetings, we would have had to add an additional subscription to our membership to get the breakout rooms to work in webinars. So not feeling like that extra expense is needed at this point in time, and going to move forward with just meetings. And that's it.
I'll just point out that in the reading file in this packet, there are some great department head budget video discussions. These have sort of flown under the radar a bit. I'll just reiterate what I said a few minutes ago about pushing this stuff out. If there's a way to do a little super mini blitz on
They're
Getting
in the
the-
newsletter.
we're in the newsletter, all right, website, Facebook. Well, no, I will never encourage anyone to go on Facebook, so I'll take that back. Whatever our regular, my front porch forum, just to get these out, and we can all do the same. Creative use of Zoom recordings too. I like how that came together. Not a lot of folks realize you can link to a Zoom recording right from Zoom and still, anyway. Sorry. Last thing is just a shout out to Public Works. This has been a wonderfully snowy winter. Anybody that likes being outside right now is super excited, but it's also been a lot of work. I think I've heard them for a week straight at 4:30 in the morning go by. And every time I do, I'm just like, it's just like the train. Wonder who's driving the truck today. So just a big thank you and for everything they're doing because they've been busy. That's all I have.
Question? What's the status on the governance committee?
The governance committee should be shortly receiving an email from Brad about next steps.
All right, so that is the agenda except for the executive sessions and those. Oh, I meant to be queuing up where those motions are. Sorry.
I've got the first one.
Oh, let's just go. Yep.
I move that the council make the specific finding that premature disclosure of the contractual matters would place the city at a substantial disadvantage. I move that the city council enter into executive session to discuss a contract pursuant to 1 VSA 313A1A to include the city council, city manager, and Mark Brislin.
I'll second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And one of these,
I think it's right.
okay, yeah, looks right. Great. Go ahead.
Okay. I move that the city council enter into executive session to discuss a personnel evaluation pursuant to 1 VSA 313A3 to include the city council.
I'll second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. I was going to say, I saw Amber say aye on the screen. I couldn't hear her, but I'm going to count it. Marcus, if you want to do the third.
Sure. I move that the city council make the specific finding that premature disclosure of the confidential attorney-client communications would place the city at a substantial disadvantage. I move that the city council enter into executive session to discuss the confidential attorney-client communications pursuant to 1 VSA 313A1F to include the city council and city manager.
Can we include? Never mind. I'll second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay, and the deliberative session we will do after our third executive session. That will not include Councillor Tebow. We will not be coming back. Right, we're not coming back with any decisions tonight.
Correct.
So, right. So I will say we are in recess and executive session after that.